Hi everyone, I'm Fred, your host, and you're watching Homuli Dance, the channel on history and board games. Today I'm happy to finally sit down with someone who isn't just an innovative board game designer, but also a fellow gamer with a deep appreciation of the historical board gaming hobby. Alex Berry, known for his unique CDGs design like High Treason and Core Bargain that was released last year, has a unique approach to blending history with gameplay, making for really immersive experiences that resonates with players that are both seasoned wargamers and new players. I think our paths first crossed on Twitter, where I think we were in the middle of a lively discussion with other designers, and Alex and I really found common ground in that discussion as we shared our appreciation for flavor text in card-driven games, and we realized that we had kind of the same perception of some aspects of the hobby. This shared passion for flavor text actually led to a few games of Julius Caesar from Columbia Games on the Rally the Troops website, where Alex crushed me a few times. But if I remember well, I think I got my revenge also a few times after I finally read the rules of the game. But yeah, I thought that with the re-release of High Treason that you can see behind me in a brand new packaging by the new Victory Point Games version. So the company was bought over by another company and they re-released some of the classic catalog. I thought it would be really a great moment for the two of us to chat. So today, the idea is just to explore Alex's relationship with history, his philosophy behind designing board games, and also just everything around the intricacies of blending mechanics with historical narratives. So without further ado, let's dive in, and I'm gonna bring Al into the chat. And here we are. Here you are. Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Thanks a lot for taking the time. I think we've been talking about this for quite a while, and I'm going to put my light on because I realize it's a bit dark. So I should probably have started with that anyway. But yeah, it's great to have you. I think we've talked a bit about having you on the show for a while. I think originally the discussion we had was around having you coming for Card Bargain and do a teach and play on the show. And I reached out to Decision Games quite a few times, and they decided never to reply to me. And I was like, okay, cool, that's what it is. And it was impossible at the time to find a copy of the game in the UK. I think now it's available with Second Chance Games, and I think maybe someone in the club has actually a copy of it. But anyway, we talked about it, we kept on interacting on Twitter. It never happened, but I thought, yeah, I had a good contact with Victory Point Games, so the new Victory Point Games. They sent me a couple of copies of games that they are republishing from the traditional Victory Point game publisher, and I thought it would be, yeah, a great moment to talk about all this. Even if I guess that this was a long time ago, and of course we won't focus on High Treason specifically, but just talk about your work in general. And maybe to start with, as is often the case, people know that no one is living from designing historical board games. Obviously, like if it was the case, we would be aware of it. So maybe to better understand who Alex Berry is, can you tell us a bit about yourself and what you do outside of war game design or historical board game design?
Sure. So I'm a criminal defense attorney, so it's kind of appropriate that my first game was High Treason. But that's what I do for a living, and that was kind of what, if I didn't have that background, I don't think I would have made High Treason. Maybe I still would have made another board game because I've loved board games, since I was a kid. I was one of those people that playing Axis and Allies, at 9 years old type of thing. The game that really got me into wargaming and historical gaming though was We the People, and I I remember spending my birthday money, my Christmas money, going downtown to the local board game store and picking that one out. And I mean, I must have played that as a kid, 40 or 50 times. So that's what got me infatuated with the CDG concept. So, um,
So you started with the original game. So
yeah,
you were here since the inception of the concept of CDG.
yes.
Uh, that's actually quite interesting. And you kept that love for CDG out of your gaming life, right?
Yes, correct. That's still my preferred type of game, because to me, strategy is making interesting choices, and CDGs just have that built into the card itself, because it's, are you playing it for ops, are you playing it for the event, and if you're playing it for ops, how many, what form is that going to take? So it's not usually a very obvious choice. So in some games, there's clearly an obvious best move to make. And I mean, sometimes you have that in a CDG too, where it's clearly best to either use it for the event or to use it for ops in the current situation you're at. But then the choice of, well, how am I going to spend those ops? If this event doesn't make sense with the current board game state, I'm going to use it for ops, but then I still have a choice on how I'm spending those ops. So it's just, to me, a good, fun game, an interesting game that makes you think, is a game that's giving you different juicy choices to make.
That's really interesting. And I think at the end of our interview or discussion about your work, I think I would like to go back to this love of CDG, and maybe pick up from where we're going to leave off here, around what do you think is the evolution of CDG, where it's going, and what gets you excited in that field. But I would like to put back the focus on you and ask you this question that is, I think, is also very revealing. Is being a player is one thing, making the decision of designing a game is another. What led you to go through that extremely tiring process and for like painful, like and sometimes feels a bit useless and absurd, the process of designing a game? What led you to that?
Well, as you know, I used to have a YouTube channel that I was pretty active on.
Yeah.
I'd film reviews, lists, that type of thing. And just when I had kids, I've got my own law practice. I just didn't have the time to put in to that. But believe it or not, I've got the time to put in to design board games. So what I found in the legal field is, if you set appointments on Friday afternoon, 85% people are going to no show. And it's when people no show and I've got that space in Friday afternoon, that's the only time I'm really working on my designs. I don't have as much free time as I would like. And so I just found, I can't be running a YouTube channel with, I don't have the time to do that. I do have the time for an hour here, 2 hours there every week to slowly put it out. I mean, that's why my production is pretty slow. I've only designed 2 games. And, when did High Treason first come out? 2016.
Yeah.
So it's a slow process.
I think it's interesting. I was about to say that, because I'm doing both also. Like, I think making video content and making games is actually not the same type of work, in the sense that I feel like game design can be a lot more fragmented, as you say. And also, game design can be done from anywhere. Like, it's not like you need your gear. You need, like, you can have just an open Google document somewhere, and you can just open it up, start again. You can just have a piece of paper always with you. So it makes sense that when you don't have that much time, you can still design games. And yeah, do you think about maybe going back to YouTube at some point, maybe when the kids are a bit older or something like this?
I mean, maybe once all the kids are grown and out of the house, maybe I'd have the time then, but not in the near or foreseeable future. So
When you're ready, you'll come on the show and we'll make one of those clickbait video when we make a top 10 something, and that will be the great return of Alex Berry, and that could be really fun. Going back to your design works, specifically, so you said you only designed 2 games, but they are on 2 very unique topics. I think that for none of those 2, I've never seen a game on those topics specifically, and that led me to wonder what makes you decide which events you want to focus on when you start designing a game.
So I think it's really important to have mechanics that are unique and applicable to the theme. I hate the Euro concept where you have this game and we could completely retheme it and it plays the exact same, just with a totally different theme. To me, the theme has to be integrated very tightly with the mechanics. And so that's how the two designs that I've done. My most recent one, Corrupt Bargain, right? So it's based on the election, the only election since the passing of the 12th Amendment, where the House of Representatives picked who the president was. And to me, that's a really unique thing, right? So, and it's prescribed in the Constitution how this works, how if there's not a majority of electoral college votes, then the House of Representatives will pick who the president is. So that's a unique basis for a mechanic. And we can base that around that unique historical event. And then the same thing with high treason. I wanted to have something based around jury selection and just how important that was. So one of the things I've learned as being a lawyer is basically all the facts are pretty much set when you're in a trial. You're not going to have a Perry Mason moment where some witness says something totally out of the blue. I mean, it does happen occasionally, but by far and above the majority is, what these witnesses are going to say. You're going to know what the evidence that's coming into trial is. So what determines the difference between losing and winning? Or why does, you can, mistry a case, jury doesn't find a verdict, they can't agree, but then you do the same trial again with basically all the same evidence and the jury finds a verdict. It's because the thing that changes is the jury and their biases, their beliefs. And so I thought that was a unique thing that hadn't really been done before in board gamings. I wanted to make a game around that. And then I specifically chose the Trial of Louis Riel because that's kind of the one major capital case in history where the defendant only got 6 jurors. So that was part of Riel's appeal was, hey, you can't convict me in a capital case. I've only got 6 jurors. I'm entitled to 12. That appeal, unfortunately, wasn't successful. But for gameplay purposes, rather than having 12 jurors that the players are dealing with, that's kind of unwieldy, I wanted to do just 6.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And maybe to build up on that, I was wondering around what's your approach for research when you're working on those games, and where do you where do you find the decision about, okay, this I'm going to put in the game, this I have to leave aside, and maybe leave in the historical notes because that's a bit too much. How do you approach, this whole process?
Sure. So I mean, it's 2 very different processes for each game. So for the High Treason Louis Riel, I basically just got the trial transcripts. And that was really my only reference, was just going through the trial transcripts and a few basic secondary sources. But everything is really just out of the trial transcripts. So I read the whole trial transcripts over, deciding, okay, this is a witness, this was a key piece of testimony, and just creating a card out of that. And then, there were some what if cards, people who didn't actually testify, people who'd fled, or they didn't testify in that trial and they had their own trial. And, I added in a few what if cards that you can choose to play with or not, depending on how historical you want to simulate the trial. And then for Corrupt Bargain, it wasn't too many, primary sources like the trials transcripts would have been in High Treason. It was more just, reading the secondary sources. JSTOR was very big help. Now you can,
because I was going to ask, the sources might have been radically different from the 2 games. So on the first one, you could actually use a lot of primary material. On the second one, I guess it was more academic articles and things like this, right?
Yes, and it's based on an event that happens 60 plus years earlier. There's just less primary sources.
I was thinking about something, and I think that's probably something that we also have the same perspective on. But I was recently having a big debate with a Euro game designer that was basically making the case that there was no room for history in board games apart from pure aesthetics and just potential cliche that you could actually convey, and that was pretty much it, and that we shouldn't have the ambition of saying anything interesting within a board game format. And I was wondering, from your perspective, do you think that by allowing players to step into the shoes of historical figures, do you believe that board games can actually potentially foster a deeper understanding and appreciation of the history? What do you think about the potential just of historical board games when it comes to conveying historical facts and historical understanding with nuance?
Yeah, I absolutely think you can do it, and it's been done. In lots of games where you the player is now learning, okay, this is how the event happened, this is how it's structured. I mean, you're going to have alternate history by how it plays out, but they'll still understand the structure of what really happened, and can kind of put themselves in the shoes of the players. I think it's there's absolutely a place for it. But every game doesn't have to be that, right? So if you're watching movies, there's a broad spectrum of movies, right? There's historical documentaries that you're learning from, and there's Three Stooges movies, and board gaming is like that. You can have the Euro Three Stooges game where you're not really learning anything, but you're just having an enjoyable time. And there's a time and place for that, and there's a time and place for the historical game that's analogous to a documentary.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I was also, just to be clear, I was a bit shocked by the take. And I thought that it felt so out of touch, and it felt like it came from someone who had never actually tried to engage seriously with the hobby. And I was shocked because he was a really well known designer who's been making games for, I don't know, 30 years, something like this. And I was also surprised that that person never had the curiosity of trying to play something else than a pure Euro game, but still had very assertive takes on something that obviously they had no idea about. But I think it's always good to remind this. And looking back into the historical perspective, the way games works, I was wondering, do you feel like there is a potential aspect of it that would make board games kind of suggest a deterministic view of history, in the sense that it's a system that is clearly established, even though you have a myriad of possibilities of what you could do. As a designer, you're aiming for maybe a specific outcome. Do you think there is this effect, or to the contrary, actually games open up the field of potential historical outcomes?
I mean, that's really just how you choose to design the game, right? So one game you could choose to design it a certain way to try and show, hey, this was what the outcome was going to be, regardless. And then it's really in the hands of the designer, you know. Um, Obviously, very small things have changed history, and other things. It seems like history was going to occur that way no matter what. So I think different historical events can be portrayed differently, and it's how the designer chooses to do it anyway, right? Like, does anyone think realistically, Nazi Germany could have won World War II after America entered the war? I don't think that's very realistic, but we have games that portray that potentially there could have been some victory that way. So it's just how the designer chooses to make the design.
And but in your approach specifically, how do you find that balance? Do you fall more into the sandboxy side of things, or do you try to keep the outcomes realistic? How do you want to approach those experiences? What do you want to offer the players as in terms of potential outcomes?
Yeah, I definitely think I kind of design it more sandboxy, where the gameplay is prominent more than the simulation factor. Because I mean, you're still playing a game. What I want to simulate is the rules that are in place. That this is how it would have occurred, but then the choices that the players make can deviate and change history and change what happened based on the players' decisions. So I'm definitely a little bit more sandboxy. I will have, this is the criteria that's setting up the game, but then it's in the hands of the players.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And to that sandboxy aspect, I think that both High Treason and Core Bargain, beyond that, also explore kind of the influence of external factors like politics, culture, on major events and stuff like this. And even the topics that you decide to explore are very different than what we would see traditionally in historical board gaming that is really focused on normally kinetic warfare. It's interesting the focus that you have in your games. Do you feel like it is critical to understand this cultural context to better appreciate the nuances of history? Do you think it's something that is actually crucial, and that potentially the as a hobby, historical hobby, we should explore a lot more topics seriously as we do war games than just kinetic warfare?
Yeah, I mean, there's a the field's wide open, right, for what we can do, and there's specifically in like the CDG round, there's lots of new games that are not just, as you say, kinetic warfare. I don't know if you're familiar with Forged in Steel, or familiar with that.
No, I've never heard about it. What is it?
Okay, it is it's a good friend of mine. I actually did some play testing for him, but it's been out for a while, and you are using the CDG mechanic to build up the city of Pueblo, Colorado, and it's a really interesting kind of economic CDG. It's and this is telling something that's not warfare in the slightest, right? So if they say, warfare is the continuation of politics,
Yeah.
you can maybe take that approach to maybe corrupt bargain that it's just a political game, because there's lots of other political games out there. There's the 1960, there's a couple of women's suffrage games. So that's out there, but I hadn't really seen any other purely almost city building CDG like Forge
Yeah.
Steel.
I think it's super interesting because, as you said, CDG lend themselves pretty well to political conflicts. Clearly, you mentioned suffrage movement CDGs, 1960. Also, you could say in a lot of ways, Twilight Struggle is mostly political, even though there is actual warfare in it also happening. 1989 is also highly political in nature, so it always fit well with that style of game. But it's true that I never thought that it would also make sense to have economical game, and you also have economical warfare. So I think it's there is definitely some potential in there. So I've never heard about this game. I would definitely like to explore it, and I think that there is also a very interesting discussion to be had with city development, city building, and actually the socio-political consequences or reasons for that. I think there is a game. I don't think I know there is a game coming by GMT from GMT called Cross Bronx Expressway that also uses some of the coin mechanics to actually talk about the development of New York in the second half of the 20th century. So definitely there are more territories to explore. And I didn't knew about this specific CDG, but definitely curious to look into it. And just to build up on what you were saying about war being the continuation of politics. So what do you think with that in mind, when you hear there is a pretty significant part of the hobby that is asking that we would leave as designer politics out of their historical games and war games? Do you feel it's a bit weird, as could we say that war is kind of political? How do you feel about that kind of position?
So I mean that's taking the broad spectrum term war. Let's say you have a battle game. It's just focused on, say, the Battle of Quezon, right? You're only doing that limited time kinetic warfare just on that battle. I don't think you need politics there or represented. It's when you're doing a broader scope that's where it makes sense to have. But if you're just doing limited battles, I almost wouldn't even. We just need broader terminology, right? So typically, if you're saying war, a whole war, you're going to have politics involved. But if you're just doing a game on just a specific battle, I don't think it needs it, right? Every game doesn't have to simulate all these other external factors if you're limited on just one area. Again, it's like there's so many genres of movies, and you don't need everything in every type of a movie. and you don't need everything in every type of a game. I think there's room for both. It just depends on what are you trying to create.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I was thinking, looking back at your games and the way you approach them, and the fact that you're addressing quite unique topics. I was wondering if you ever received feedbacks from players that would come to you and say, "I've played your game; it was super interesting, and it changed my perspective on a specific event, or potentially even change your perspective on things that are happening right now around them because they learned something new from one of your games." Did you had some experience with those kind of feedbacks?
Yeah, I think there's more of that type of feedback in High Treason than in Corrupt Bargain. So, because I mean, some people, they're just not really familiar with the jury trial. They don't know anything about it other than what they've seen on TV. And so I've probably gotten more of that than the kind of unique political system in 1824.
I think that would be my maybe final question on the design side of things. But as you know, and as you've seen potentially, and there were always a lot of discussion, especially as soon as you touch the topic of the American Civil War, for example. History is often a subject of contention that often have political echoes or ripple effects in today's discourse. And history has different interpretation, different perspective, them also being somewhat political. How do you handle potential controversies on topics that you're covering in your games? How do you find this balance between trying to remain as objective as possible and try to portray in fairness an event, but also trying to show how you think things went through? So how do you find this subtle balance?
Well, again, I think it is still primarily a game at the heart of it, right? Because if it's too much of a simulation, you're not going to get the casual player coming in and sitting down. So it depends on what your audience is, and what you're trying to do. I'm trying to make, I think, a game that's going to appeal to people just interested at the game level. And again, I think you have to just be careful and nuanced. I mean, I think I'm going to be the next game I'm trying to work on is the Nuremberg trials. Obviously, a very important topic that it's waiting. You got to get it done right. So that's why I've been taking a lot of time to try and get it be done right. But it's really each designer's got to make that choice. I don't think I'm doing anything overly controversial. But maybe somebody else has a different view of what I've done.
Yeah, it's definitely a sensitive topic. That's for sure. How did you approach this? Did you build upon some of the things that you explored with High Treason? What did you want it to do with that design?
Yeah. So what I've got in this design is it would be a 4-player game where everyone's playing one of the 4 main prosecution powers. So someone's the Soviet Union, somebody's Britain, somebody's France, and somebody's America. And everyone has different hidden goals. So start of the game, all the defendants are on trial. You're going to basically have 5 different goals. So, you want this specific, if you're the Soviet Union, there's 5 people you want to make sure get the death penalty. In actual history, 3 defendants were acquitted. So as America, that is what your goal is. You're going to just randomly seed which 3 you need to get acquitted. As the French, you want everyone convicted, but not necessarily the death penalty for everyone. But you do want at least life imprisonment for everyone. And then the British want everyone convicted to at least a definitive amount of time, not necessarily life imprisonment or the death penalty. So what the players are doing is they're all playing the good guys, the prosecution powers, but they have different goals, and how they're playing the cards is going to be the constraint. I didn't want to make a game where one player is necessarily like only and solely defending the Nazis. So
Yeah. There is actually a game that is being released right now by a Spanish publisher called The Other Side of the Hill. I don't know if you've seen that, which is
I'm not.
basically a cooperative game where each of the players are taking the role of a member of German High Command during World War II. And so you have a game of internal politics and rivalry, but also managing the fronts and everything. And yeah, I was quite uneasy with, like, I felt uneasy with that topic. I'm like, well, it's really weird to have for me, a cooperative game where everyone is playing a Nazi. And I understand that the designer really thought it through, did his research and everything, have no doubt in it. But as a player, I'm like, oof, I'm not sure that that's for me. Do you have those kind of things where you're like, this is maybe pushing it a bit too far?
Yeah, I think everyone has that, and everyone has that for different games on what they feel is appropriate. Not every game's for every person, you know. So
And what would be Alex's limit?
I don't know. I just have to see it at a case by case basis. I don't know if there's a bright line rule for anything.
Yeah.
So.
Is there any games recently that you saw and you were like, "Phew, that's a bit too much"? Or
Nothing that, again, I've not paid as much attention to games as I used to. I used to be addicted, spending an hour or 2 hours every day on Board Game Geek. That I don't have time for that anymore. So I'm not on top of things as much to really know. But I'm sure there is some games out there that I'm just like, that's a little too much. It's just pushing the envelope too much. I'm not interested. But again, I'm just not paying attention too much
yeah.
to name anything.
Beyond the game on the Nuremberg trial, is there any other projects that you're thinking about, things that you're tinkering on the side, or is that your main focus and you're only working on this?
I've got a few other things that I'm kind of tinkering on, but they're all in too early stages. The main focus, the one I'm putting 85% of my limited free time into, is the Nuremberg game.
When you feel that you're ready and you have a prototype to share, I would be very happy to have you again on the show so we can talk about it for sure. Now, we would like to go back to your experience as a player. So, we talked in the beginning about the fact that you started with the first CDG ever released, and to this day, you still love CDGs. And I wanted to have your perspective on how do you feel that specific genre of game evolved over time. What were for you the big shifts, and do you feel like we are at the end of the after golden age of CDG? Do you feel that there is a lot of good things happening right now, or you're expecting for things in the future? What's your perspective on that specific style of game?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's room for it to keep growing. The possibilities are limitless. I think we've not had as much recently, because there's been a big adoption of coin. In some of those games, those could have been like a CDG, I feel like, but they were designed in a coin system. And one aspect I really enjoy that you in a CDG that you don't have in coin is the hand management. That's such a critical aspect. But I mean, we constantly see developments in just different ways you can play. So for instance, in Hearts and Minds, I don't know if you've played that game or not, Fred. But
yeah, I did. I like it a lot.
Yeah, and it did a bunch of interesting things where you would get a certain number of ops that you would just get those number of ops, and then you could choose to buy the event with some of those ops. And I'm not sure if there's another CDG that does it, but that was a kind of unique mechanic where you're always getting these ops, and then do you want to use all the ops? You'll still get a few ops if you buy the event or not. And so I just thought
for me, it was the first time I saw it, and I thought it was a super interesting idea. You were talking about making decisions, and I think it streamlines the decision process, but you keep that core decisions here. Like you have that number of ops, whatever, but it gives you just more options on how to spend them, which I think is super interesting. And I think that's a really good point. For me, I think in the last couple of years, the one that I really liked. I don't know if you've played South China Sea, the small CDG on the diplomatic conflict between the US and China that was released by GMT Games.
No, I'm familiar with it. I haven't played it. I don't know. I don't like to play modern games.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like, so the most recent in time game that I enjoy is the one on the Bosnian War, Brotherhood
Oh
and
yeah,
Unity. Yeah,
Brotherhood and Unity,
yeah,
awesome game.
and
Yeah.
it's a fantastic 3-player game. But that's about the most recent in time. I just don't want to play something that's, you know,
Current events.
current
Yeah.
events.
So we did find your limit. We
Yeah,
did find it. So we
yes.
did find one of the limits of Alex Berry. But no, and I was mentioning specifically this game, not really for its topic, but for one mechanic in it, that all cards are also scoring cards. And when you play the card, you have to decide, do you play it for the event, for the ops, or do you want to play the scoring? Which I thought was also an amazing innovation. I don't know if anyone is going to pick it up, but I feel like there are some games that come up with innovation that are mind bending for me as a designer. I'm like, oh my God, why didn't I think about this? This is awesome. And I'm always curious for to see. So I would encourage people that are thinking about making CDGs to play around with, because I agree with you. There is a lot of potential, and I think this is one of the great ones. Hearts and Minds and event costing ops is also another one of them, which I think is also another brilliant idea. But there is definitely territories to explore.
I think another unique one. I know. I think we're both fans of it. Is Strike of the Eagle, the Polish Soviet game, where
Love
the
it.
cards. You can do it for the ops. You can do it for the event. You can do it for reinforcements. But it's also used to resolve the battle.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know if there's too many other ones that do that as well.
So the only one that I know that does that, but in a simpler manner, it's the Napoleon 1806, 1807, 1815 series from Shaco's Games, where you use the card to resolve any kind of test. So when you're going to move units, you're going to draw a card and you're going to see how far you're actually able to move. When you're going to fight, you're going to draw a certain number of cards, and that's going to tell you how much damage or fatigue you're providing to your opponents. And Combat Commander is like this also. But I feel like in Strike of the Eagle, you have so much decision, because when you resolve a combat, you can either draw from the deck and you will see how much extra damage you're doing, or you can decide to play a card from your hand, so you'll know exactly what is going to come. And sometimes it's because you're trying to reach a certain threshold, so it might be a decision, but the opportunity cost of playing a card from your hand to resolve a combat is so high that it is like, you're like, should I do this? And those kind of questions are amazing. I love it. Yeah, I think it's amazing. But yeah, we should probably play a game of Strike of the Eagle at some point. But you hate Vassal, right? That's
I just don't have the time or inclination.
Yeah.
So
I probably I need to. Yeah, I would need to go to the US and just come and play with you. Do you go to conventions?
yeah, I'm going to the Board Game Geek convention in November. So that's the city I live in. There's not many direct flights to other places. One of the few places it flies direct is Dallas, where the Board Game Geek convention is. So I'm going there. I've got a few games lined up. So
okay. But and you play also non-historical games like classic board games when even as a player? Is it something that you look in, like you're playing with, or you're really focused on the historical games mostly?
No, I mean with my family and my kids, I play
Yeah.
a lot of non-historical games. So,
Okay.
but if it's my buddies, and usually then I want to just do a historical game.
Yeah, fair enough. And what game are you? So because of the life that you have limited amount of time for gaming. What is the game, your Grail game, the game that if you can and you can squeeze it in, you will do, like the game that you think about that you would like to be able to play?
Yeah. The game I will always kind of want to play, because it's not too long. I mean, there's some length to it. Is Successors, because I like games with alternate win conditions. And Successors has that where you can score a legitimacy win by becoming the most legitimate successor to Alexander, or you can get the points win by just conquering enough territory. I just really enjoy games with not just you're getting victory points different ways, but you obtain victory in radically different ways. And that, to me, that's interesting. And Successors just does that well in the CDG format. And because you're seeded the generals differently, you're going to have so much replayability, right? Because the setup for who has the generals is just so diverse. If you're playing Twilight Struggle, this is the setup basically every game. Like, you can choose where you're putting in your support, but it's basically the same setup right away. In almost any other CDG. In Successors, because of just the random deal of which generals you're getting, it can be played from the setup just so radically different.
Yeah, and I really like this thing about those alternative victory conditions, and the fact that you can win by fulfilling a condition and not just by accumulating victory points is something that appeals to me quite a lot. There is even if you could tie it to even if it's abstract as a victory point, I feel like it builds in Successors a stronger narrative. And I'm thinking, so overall, what do you think about victory points? Do you think that victory points or a clutch for for designers? Should we kill victory points and try to think about victory conditions? What's your feelings around this?
I mean, again, I think there's room for both. So I mean, for take Corrupt Bargain, the game. I mean, victory points are effectively the electoral college votes, but you can win by getting simply enough victory points, electoral college votes, to get an outright win. If not, then there's this alternative victory where you are going for, each state is a victory point, where you're then getting enough votes to win in the House of Representatives. So, I mean, that game is, you can't really have a non-victory point win condition because it's just how it's designed. Same with 1960 or whatnot. But other games, I think you can have other types of win conditions that are not really represented by victory points at all.
Yeah, and I think it's something that I said in the discussion, that the I feel like the American editorial system is highly gamified, so it has actually victory points baked into it. So I think it makes sense that you have victory points for anything that touches on presidential elections. I think that's just the nature of it. It is a victory point game at its core, so it does make a lot of sense. And maybe to conclude this discussion, what are you playing at the moment, if anything? What's your hot game of the moment?
I mean, it varies. I don't know if I've got one where it's like, hey, we're going to play this week after week after week. The game that I would say probably comes most to that would be Undaunted Stalingrad, where I'm going through the campaign with one of my buddies, and I think we're 12 missions in or so. And it's just, I host a game night once a week, have people show up. When it's just me and him, though, that's the game we're going, and we're going to try and finish out. So that's probably my most played game in the last year or so.
It's a really interesting game. Did you play the Undaunted games before the rest of the series?
Yeah, and I actually didn't really enjoy it, and I'd gotten rid of it because I just didn't find it was that interesting. I find the legacy aspect is adding so much more, and I feel the individual scenarios are better designed. So I did have the original Undaunted. I traded it, but the legacy aspect, where by the decisions you're making, they're carrying over into the next scenario, just adds much more importance to your decisions.
Yeah, there is a weight, you really feel the weight of your decision, which I really like. And it's funny that you would say that, because for me, I loved Undaunted Normandy, but because mostly of its almost abstract nature. And when I played War Chest for the first time, I realized that what I loved in Undaunted Normandy was really this its sharpness, and this is why I was maybe less of a fan of Undaunted North Africa, because it was a bit in between. It was less sharp, a bit more narrative, but not enough for me to get into it. And then Stalingrad came, and I was like, "Phew, that's on a whole new level," and actually going really far away from the sharpness of it, and having this ongoing building narrative and very convoluted scenarios made a lot more sense in a way. Have you played War Chest then?
I haven't. No.
Okay. I would be curious to see I'm obsessed with War Chest. I love it. I think it's really good, but it's at its core an abstract game in a lot of ways. But I think it's one of the funniest abstract game I've played in recent years. Good, but it was great chatting with you, Alex. Thanks for taking the time to answering to this interview. I hope that we'll have you again on the show, knowing that you have a busy schedule. So I will keep that in mind. But it would be great if we can have you on once again, potentially for a card bargain. So this is a plea to Decision Games, if they can enter my emails and tell me if they can send review copies, and we can organize something. That would be awesome. And if not, we'll find a way to get you on with great pleasure. Expect some content on High Treason. I actually have the two versions, the old one and the new one. So I think I would also show the differences between the two versions, and talk a bit about the game itself. So
there's three versions. So when you say
I only have two, yeah.
Which one are you referring to?
So the one that I have is the small pizza box format from
Yes.
Victory Point Games, yeah. And there was one before that, right? That was the second edition, actually, yeah.
So the pizza box one's the first edition, and then there's a second edition in between.
Okay.
The one you got.
Okay, so I only have two out of the three. I'm sorry, but I can make the comparison between the first one and the new one. And the new one is actually really quite nice.
Yes,
I think the box is probably a bit too big. I think it could have done with a smaller box when you see the content that's in it. But it looks like they at least aesthetically did a really nice work. So I'm looking forward to dive into it. Great.
Well, I hope you're a fan of the flavor text. I know that's something we've been in agreement with, but I just saw somebody else is doing a review and was not a fan of the flavor text at all, wanted it all in the rule book. So
I think this is a weird discussion. That's probably a discussion for another time. If we ever have a panel, like a big debate with other designers about flavor text, would you be happy to join? So we can.
I would love to be there.
Yeah. Okay, because I find this discussion. I understand both sides of the argument. One side is obviously wrong, but I understand why they would think what they think, that they are misguided, but I understand where they come from. But sometimes I feel like people are just completely missing the point. It's like you literally have the place for it, and it's a game about history. Why don't we want some historical flavor text here? It's like, or if it's a problem, just play a Euro game. That's fine. Nobody will bother you with the theme. Like if that's a problem for you. But yeah, that's a discussion for another time. But it was great having this chat. Happy to finally have you on the show. When you go back on YouTube, let me know. We should do a collab for top 10 overrated games or something like this. Some good rage bait kind of content to get you going. Yes. We could do that. But yeah, it was great discussing with you. And for those of you watching, thanks for watching. Remember to like, share, subscribe, and all of this. And if you want to support the show, you can donate on Ko-fi, and that will give you access to our Discord server. Thanks everyone, and see you soon. Bye bye.